Dr. Nicolosi graduated from the New School for Social Research. He received his MA there, and then received his PhD in clinical psychology from the California School of Professional Psychology, Los Angeles. He's a licensed psychologist in California. Dr. Nicolosi is one of 3 founding members and former president of the National Association for Research and Therapy of Homosexuality, NARTH. He's a published author, international speaker, and has appeared on several radio and television shows, including Focus on the Family and Dr. Phil. And just from a personal standpoint, from Outpost perspective, we're just so grateful for Dr. Nicolosi. He really laid so much of the foundation that we as a ministry have then been built on in this area. And so we're very, very grateful to him, very thankful for the work that he's done and the work that he continues to do. So with that, I will welcome Dr. Joseph Nicolosi.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Well, many of you are here, probably you're here because you were personally touched by the question of, or the issue of homosexuality. Most people would rather not think about homosexuality unless something happens to them, either directly or indirectly, that causes you to consider the condition. What I want to do tonight is talk about the cause of homosexuality, specifically the male condition, and we're going to be looking at the family dynamics that created the condition. And I know that there are maybe some mothers and fathers here, parents, and so this is not to be critical, not to make parents feel guilty or responsible. These are family dynamics that people unconsciously participate in. And even though we've worked with many, many parents, no mother or father ever wanted their child to have to deal with homosexuality. So try to understand that this is about information and not blame, of course. To begin with, homosexuality is not a sexual problem, it's a gender identity problem. That's the foundation of the same-sex attraction. Homosexuality is not about sex, it's about a person's sense of himself, about his relationships, how he forms and establishes relationships, his self-identity, his self-image, personal shame, his ability to sustain intimacy. Homosexual behavior is always, my wife says, be careful when you speak publicly, don't speak in absolutes. I'm saying homosexual behavior is always prompted by an inner sense of emptiness. I remember working with a physician, after a couple of sessions, you know, the client always comes in wanting to deal with this homosexuality, and it turns out that we don't even talk about the homosexuality, we talk about everything else. And he said to me, after a couple of months of therapy, he said to me, I realize that the good news is that I don't have a sexual problem, the bad news is that my problem is everything else. But he's absolutely right. To go over the details of it, the 4 gay myths, 10% of the population of homosexuality, not true. It's really 1.5% to 2%. 10% has been promoted by Kinsey, 1950s. It turns out that Kinsey himself was a homosexual. Of course, that was never talked about. And it was picked up by the gay press. The gay activists were working with some people in the media, and they came up with 10%. In fact, recently we came across a meeting of gay and lesbian professionals, and Charles Silverstein said, well, we were working with some reporters, and we said 20%, and the reporter said, no, that's too high. And we said, well, 3%, no, how about 10%? And the reporter said, yeah, 10% sounds good. And that's how they came up with 10%, and people have been believing 10%. You're born gay. That's one of the foundational myths of the homosexual, the gay movement. And they've been promoting the gay gene. 1991, Simon LeVay was supposed to have found biological evidence. I can tell you that there is no evidence, no conclusive evidence for a biological or a genetic foundation of homosexuality. Once gay, always gay. This is another fundamental principle of the gay movement. And this is why testimonies of individuals who have come out of homosexuality is such a threat to the gay movement. Because when an individual says, I was once homosexual and now I'm heterosexual, that is a fundamental challenge to the agenda, because many public opinion studies show that if people believe gays are born this way, they're more likely to accept the homosexual. But if there's any possibility of choice, then the acceptance of gays diminishes. Homosexuality is normal in every way, and this is another fundamental. It's just a question of taste. It's like vanilla or chocolate. There's nothing wrong except preference. In the media, in the movies, we see the gay character, the young gay character, especially on television. He's normal, well-adjusted, non-erotic, wholesome, good-looking, at peace with himself. It's usually the heterosexual guy who's insecure and anxious about his sexuality. Tolerance versus approval. A very important distinction. We're living in a culture of sound bites, and people are getting confused. We have to make the distinction between tolerance versus approval. We have to be tolerant of people living their life and seeking their happiness the way they want, but it doesn't mean that we have to give approval, and that's where Christians get confused. You know, if I don't approve, then I'm intolerant. No. We make the distinction and talk about informed disapproval. Informed disapproval does not mean homophobia. Phobia means irrational fear of. We're not talking about irrational fear. We're just saying that we are disapproving of homosexual behavior as normal and natural and equivalent to heterosexuality based upon our education, based upon our studies, based upon coming to conferences like this today, based upon your faith tradition. Your faith tradition is a valid source of information, of education. So many Christians are made to believe that if you disapprove of homosexuality, science is against you. You know, you have religion, which is just a belief system, and then you have science. I can tell you the science supports biblical teachings on homosexuality. Gay versus homosexual. It's very important for us to make the distinction between these two words, because gay activists would have us believe that gay and homosexual are synonymous. So if you're debating, if you're talking to someone, know the difference between these two terms. Gay is a social, political identity. It's basically saying homosexuality is normal and natural for me. That's a gay identity. That's different from homosexual. Homosexual is simply a description of sexual preference. It's a psychological condition. The people that come to our clinic are dealing with homosexuality, are homosexual, but they're not gay identified. They reject the gay self-label. Now that I've made that distinction, I want to confuse you a little more by saying there is no such thing as a homosexual. There's no such thing as a homosexual. We are all heterosexual. But some of us heterosexuals have a homosexual problem. It's amazing how the gay activists have taken a word that once described a condition to encompass the total personality. He is a homosexual. It's like saying he is an alcoholic. Are we saying that intoxication is a normal state of mind for this person? He has a condition. I remember a father calling me up a little while ago. He said, our 15-year-old son just announced that he's a homosexual, and we want to trust someone like you, a psychologist, to tell us, is he homosexual or not? I said, he's not. He said, you haven't even seen him yet. I don't have to see him. If he is a male, does he have a penis? He's heterosexual. To be very simplistic, but true. So homosexuality is not intrinsic to our true nature. It violates the natural law, and which is, by the way, the natural law compatible with our Christian faith. Even some of our church leaders are actually confused and believe God made two kinds of people, homosexuals and heterosexuals. No. Homosexuality as a gender identity disorder. In the treatment of our clients, we always go back to this. And they lose sight of it sometimes. Two gay men are standing on the street corner, and a beautiful woman walks by. And one gay guy says to the other, it's moments like this that I wish I was a lesbian. Because he's confused, you understand? We could lighten it up, folks. All right? It's going to be a long night, so let's get with it. So homosexuality is not about sex, it's about self-identity. Homosexuality is based in the masculine inferiority, and it's a striving to connect with a masculinity lacking within himself. All right, so let's go through the whole developmental process, okay, just for a few minutes. And I'll be focusing on the male homosexual condition, okay? I'm going to put the female creation, the lesbian formation aside for a while. Like all things feminine, it's more complicated to talk about. It's full of contradictions, so we're not going to get into that later. All right. People say, do you work with lesbians? I said, no, I only work with male homosexuals because lesbians have an irrational, when you work with them, they have an irrational anger toward men. And I get enough of that at home. Now there's too much laughter. Could we get a little more serious? It's getting out of hand here. Okay, so we're talking about the gender identity phase. The gender identity phase is from 1.5 to 3 years old. That's the time when the child, especially the boy, begins to notice that the world is divided between male and female. Until then, many studies, child studies, show that the child at the earlier age doesn't make that distinction. But now he begins to realize that the world is divided between male and female, and which one is he going to be? As Richard Green from UCLA said, or actually Robert Stoller, who was an early student of this, said masculinity is an achievement. And we have to understand that masculinity is an achievement. It doesn't come naturally. He's wired to be masculine, but he needs the support of the mother and the father and the culture to make that transition from identification with the mother to bonding with the father. And to do that, you need a mother who's willing to let the boy go and move beyond her sphere, and a father who is welcoming and supporting. And I use the word seductive, but in the sense of being interesting. Who is this guy? What is he about? I'm kind of like him. I want to connect with him. And so he leaves the mother and reaches out to the father. Now that's a challenge to all children, and the child goes through what they call an androgynous phase. The androgynous phase, androgyny means both male and female. The androgynous fantasy is that I can be male and female. I don't want to have to make a choice. I am special. That's the infantile narcissism. I am special, I can be both. And when you look at gay writings, you still see that. It's part of the gay agenda. It's not just civil rights. It's about transforming the distinction between male and female and blurring it and making it an option, making it up to the individual to determine if he wants to be male or female. He's wired for that masculine ambition, so he disidentifies with the mother and bonds with the father. Now, for our clients, the boy reaches out to the father and he experiences the father as not interested in him. Either the father is cruel, mean, or in most cases, just not emotionally present to the boy. So the boy reaches out, sees that the father is disinterested in him, and he has a collapse. He has a shutdown, deflation. We call that shame. He's been narcissistically wounded. And he essentially gives up his masculine strivings. He gives up. I can't connect with this guy. He is making me feel unworthy. I can't win him over. And this is the internalization. This is really the problem. The child is not saying there's something wrong with him. The child is saying there must be something wrong with me. And that's the key of a homosexual problem. The therapy is all about there's really nothing wrong with you. You are masculine. Let's get you to feel and actualize your masculinity so that you don't need to eroticize other men. You got it. Yeah, so that's the foundation of it. So the guy with the homosexual problem is living in an anticipatory shame posture. And he's ill at ease, especially around other men. He's self-conscious. He's wondering, am I acceptable? He's aware of his behavior, his posture. There's a preoccupation. Am I good enough? Am I accepted by other men? The whole therapy is about that. Father salience. This is very important to understand. In order for the boy to disidentify with the mother and bond with the father has to be perceived as salient. What does salient means? It means two things: strong and benevolent. The father has to be seen good, and he has to be strong. If the father is seen as strong but malevolent, scary, he doesn't make the bonding. If the father is perceived as good but weak, that's not good either. Okay, I remember a client of mine saying, he says, I said, what was your relationship with your father? He says, oh, I had a wonderful father. I loved my father. And you usually don't hear that too much with our clients. There's usually an emotional disappointment. There's a hurt, a grievance with the father. And this guy said, well, it was a wonder. My father was a saint. He was one. And I'm really curious about this because I've never really quite... So I said, tell me more. He said, well, my father would make us laugh. He would entertain us. And he would, in fact, he would make us kids giggle at the table, so much so that my mother would get angry and send him to the corner. And he had to sit in the corner for the rest of the meal. So already you get a picture. He was good, but he was weak. So that's important. The boy needs both to be worthy of imitation, of modeling. He has to have the father strong and good. And he has to see his therapist as strong and good. And the healing of homosexuality, for the therapist to connect your client with men who are salient, who accept him for who he is. All this talk about the homophobic church. Let me tell you, there are so many good men in the church, heterosexual, who are willing to develop a mentorship with a guy struggling with same-sex attraction. And they're available. So when we look at the whole situation, we're talking about what we call the classic triadic relationship. The classic triadic relationship is mother, father, and son. The relationship with the son and the mother is, between mother and son, is over emotionally involved. She's a strong personality. She's dominant. Father is quiet, withdrawn, non-expressive, emotionally unavailable. And the son is temperamentally shy, timid, introverted, artistic, imaginative. Now, it doesn't mean that those temperamental predispositions determine homosexuality. You still need the family dynamic to make that transition from temperament to sexual orientation. When you look more closely at the classic triadic relationship, and many, many studies have shown this, besides the clinical evidence, many objective measures have shown this classic. I mean, the APA has no idea why people are homosexual. We see this every day. Within the classic triadic relationship, we see that mother and father had a poor communication, especially during that gender identity phase. Between the mother and son, there was a special relationship. We had a special understanding. My mother and I understood each other so well. We were soulmates. However, built into that is a great deal of frustration. I remember a client telling me, and that seems to capture, he said, my mother was my best friend, but when we would get into an argument, she was always right and I was always wrong. That seems to capture the ambivalent relationship. With a father, it's guarded, ill at ease, sometimes antagonistic. If there is an older brother, it's a feared, hostile relationship. I have never seen a client dealing with homosexuality who had a loving, supportive, salient older brother. Freud said, Sigmund Freud, who did the early studies, said if a homosexual has an older brother, it's a feared, hostile relationship. I've never seen an exception to that. Let's consider the mother's role. Even though we put the emphasis on the father, let's consider the mother's role. What is her relationship as wife to husband? How does she portray the father to this little boy? Does she show this little boy that daddy is to be respected and looked up to? He's the head of the house. He's a masculine figure. How does she represent masculinity to the son? Does she make the boy feel good about his masculinity? Many of our clients tell us that the mother did not seem to appreciate the growing masculinity within him. In fact, sometimes undermined the growing masculinity. The physical nature of the father-son relationship, which becomes sexual. The boy, father-son, they want that emotional closeness. So much of homosexual desire is really just a desire, not for sex, but for that physical closeness, that physicality. That's how the father-son bond. In fact, we encourage our clients with their young sons, the GID, the gender identity disturbed boys, wrestle with your son, play with him physically, engage him, let him win, let him beat you up, let him feel strong and powerful in relationship to you. We've all seen this little ritual that we don't even take seriously. You get the young father tossing the son up in the air and catching him, tossing him up and catching him, and the boy is petrified, and the mother is watching this ritual and she's getting a heart attack. She thinks she's going to drop the kid, But they catch him and throw him up and catch him. Throw him up and catch. Well, what's going on there? There's a bonding that's happening there. Besides that, there's an important lesson that fathers teach sons, namely, danger can be fun. Very important. But more importantly, daddy will catch you. Scary? Daddy caught you. Scary? Daddy caught you. Even if he cracks his head, at least he'll be straight. A small price to pay, I say. He'll have no memory for show tunes, but that's all right. He'll never see colors vividly, Everything is kind of gray, but that's all right. I made that joke, by the way, at a conference, and there was a reporter from the LA Times. An hour and a half conversation, that's what she quoted. Nicolosi said, if they fall on their head, it's a small price to pay. LA Times. So we advise fathers, if you don't hug your sons, some other man will. Father is mystery. This is something we've seen over and over again. I never understood my father. I never knew what he was feeling. I never knew what he was thinking. It was a mystery. See, masculinity is a mystery. For the heterosexual, women are a mystery. And if you're married, it's a big mystery, right? But for the guy with a homosexual problem, men are mysteries. What's going on there? What's it like to be him? What would it be like to be him, right? Didn't know much about my father. My mother, I could read her mind. I knew exactly how to manipulate her. I knew exactly what was going on. We move on to the latency period. The latency period now is from 5 to 12 years old, okay? And at this point, the peers become very, very important. Now mother and father are secondary to the other boys, and we have time and time again stories of painful, poor peer relationships. Feeling rejected, feeling left out, feeling not a part, not good enough in sports, not being bold enough, not being sporty enough. A lot of traumatic memories that have to be worked through in the therapy. We talk about the kitchen window boy. The kitchen window boy is the boy who's at home. He's looking out the window. He's in the kitchen with his mother and his grandmother and his aunt and his oldest. He looks out the window and he sees these boys playing, roughhousing, and there's a physicality and he wishes he could be part of that. But he's afraid. He's timid. So he wants to engage in that, but he's afraid. And so much of homosexual fantasy is about that. I just saw a man a day before I got on the plane to come here yesterday, and we were talking about the male pornography, and he said I particularly like the porn that happens outdoors. I go, why outdoor? He says because there's something exciting and adventurous and dangerous about having sex in public. Because it represents what he is not, which is timid and shy. So the homosexual object, the person that they are homosexually attracted to, is the image of I wish I could be, but I'm afraid to be. So I have to secondarily connect with it. Cross-gender behavior. During this period of time, we see a lot of cross-gender behavior. Richard Green calls it the sissy boy syndrome, or gender nonconformity. Richard Green from UCLA. And it's a high prediction. Gender nonconformity, femininity is a high predictor of adult homosexuality, bisexuality, or transgenderism. Transgenderism is very serious. It's about changing sex change operations with surgery and chemotherapy and all kinds of changes to try to get the body to conform to the mind. Instead of trying to get the mind to conform to the body, they're doing it the other way around. And many studies show that these people are not particularly happy afterwards, but it's a big business. A meta-analysis is a study of all studies. Meta-analysis says that 75% predictor of gender non-conforming boys become homosexual, bisexual, or transgender. And we have the good little boy. This is the condition of the pre-homosexual boy. Very good, very polite, very mannered, very concerned about mommy's feelings, very concerned. So again, see, there's a shame. See, the shame, the feeling of unworthiness, creates a vigilance and the anticipation of being shamed. So I have to keep people happy. I have to get people to like me because I have this shameful part of me. And the shameful part of me is I'm not male enough. I'm not good enough. In fact, it's not just about gender. I am not good enough. When you really penetrate the idea behind homosexuality, I am not good enough. Good enough for what? I'm not lovable enough. I don't belong. And that's why we see as little boys, they're very polite, very well-mannered, and then they grow up to be gay activists, and they want to break that good little boy mold. He feels anger and he wants to rebel. This is why these words are very big in the gay community. Transgressive. We want to be transgressive. We want to be shocking. We want to be offensive. We want to be provocative. Have you ever seen a gay pride parade? It's outrageous. Right? It's like in your face. It's as if these were all little boys who had to be good and polite, and now they can just break out. Theater and acting is very much a part of this fantasy. Many studies show that the pre-homosexual boys into theater and acting, pretense, make-believe, pretend. I recall the case of the little boy came home from school once. He said, Mommy, he says, we're doing a play at school, and I'm playing the part of the father. The mother got very, very angry. She said, you go back and tell him you want a speaking part. The physical nature of heterosexual development, again, that physical contact is so important. Alienation from the body. Excessive modesty in boyhood. Exhibitionism in adulthood. I remember a client of mine saying, he says, I remember I was about 7 years old and I was taking a bath and my mother and my aunt were giving me a bath and something happened with the water or the plug or something was with the water and they had to call my uncle in, and when my uncle came in, I covered up. He said, even then at 7 years old, I knew there was something wrong. Again, it goes back to that inferiority. He doesn't own his body. He doesn't own his body because he doesn't have the compartment of masculinity that matches his changing, developing male body. And so exhibitionism is a big part of adult homosexuality. What is exhibitionism? It's a desire to be seen. I want to be seen as a man by a man. That's the deepest desire. But I don't know how to do it personally. I don't know how to do it man to man, so I'm going to do it in a narcissistic way of being seen, which is the narcissistic flattery. A number of our clients will tell me, I'll go to a gay bar, sit there for 3 or 4 hours, have a drink, no sexual interest, but just getting guys to buy me drinks and flattering me and paying attention to me. Sexual abuse, man-boy sexual contact and homosexual outcome. This is something gay activists deny, but it's true. 1/3 of our clients at our clinic were sexually abused by older boys or men. And that's random. That's not just a small sample of homosexuals who are unhappy. Many, many studies show that the personal histories of gay men often report same-sex abuse. And gay activists are more likely to lobby for lower sexual age of consent. Okay? Let me give you a quick story. It shows you the craziness of the American Psychological Association, American Psychiatric Association. My wife and I have been doing this research work, and we're just taking a break. And we're sitting in the backyard, and we're just relaxing, and she gets this monthly periodical. And the monthly periodical just gives a quick report of all the psychological studies published in the psychological journals that month. And she's looking it over, and she goes, oh, look at this. She said, this is interesting. A study put out by the American Psychological Association says that children who are sexually molested by adults may not necessarily be harmed, and in fact may benefit. Let me look at that. There must be a mistake here. No, sure enough, that's it. So I ordered the original article. I read it over. It's junk science. Junk science. I could see it at a glance. Okay. So what do you do in a situation like this? You make 10 copies and you send it out to your colleagues and you say, guys, take a look at this. What do you think? Isn't this terrible? And you get the typical response of the typical psychologist. Well, who knows? I don't know what they mean. Well, what do you mean by a benefit? Are you crazy? This is bad. So I sent that, I don't know if you remember, Dr. Laura Schlesinger. You remember Dr. Laura Schlesinger? Okay, right? Okay. Half Italian, half Jewish. What a combo. 50% Jewish, 50% Italian, 100% narcissistic. What a gal. So she gets a look at this. She says, this is crazy. This is terrible. So she does on the radio, and the conservative radio stations pick it up. Fox News picks it up. APA says children are not harmed, and everybody gets excited. But the American Psychological Association refuses to change. That this is science, and we're sorry we're offending, and we're challenging your assumptions, blah, 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 blah. But we keep putting the pressure on. So much so that there is a congressional vote which unanimously condemns the American Psychological Association. They still hold firm. They try to hire a public relations organization to do damage control. The first public relations company didn't even want to touch it. They found another one, tried its best. Now the American Psychiatric Association joins us against the American Psychological Association. Never happened in the history of these two organizations. We put pressure, pressure, pressure. Suddenly they changed. They changed. They said, yeah, you're right. Yeah, it wasn't good. So this is where we are as a science. All right. Now, if we did not bring attention to this, if we did not protest it, that would have been part of the literature, and it would have been referenced, it would have been footnoted, and it would have been just like 10%, 10%, 10%. Just like people can't change. People can't change. Let me tell you another story. The American Psychological Association takes the position that homosexuality cannot be changed through therapy. In fact, if you try to do it, you're probably creating harm. That's the conclusion of the American Psychological Association. If that's true, I'm out of business. All right? If you can change the homosexual through therapy, and if you try to change, you're going to create greater harm. Okay, how did they get to this conclusion? They got the conclusion from a task force. It was called the APA Task Force on Therapeutic Change. 8 members of the task force. 8 members of the task force. How many were gay? Now, before you answer, remember this is a scientific organization. If 2% of the population is gay, and you got 8 members, and you want to be scientific, and you want to make sure there's no bias, how many should you have? Maybe half, right? Or 1? Right. Of the 8, 7 were gay. 7 were gay. And they were the ones who had to determine whether or not people can change. Now, think about it for a minute. To be gay, when you look at the literature, the coming out process, this is coming out of the closet. The coming out of the closet means this. And you see this over and over again. I wanted to change. I realized I had this problem. I was told I was going to go to hell, and I prayed and prayed and prayed. It didn't go away. And one day I met this person, my gay teacher, my gay pastor, my gay therapist, and I was told that this is how I am, this is normal and natural for me. And they had to, in order to get a gay identity, they had to grieve the possibility of ever being straight. In other words, before you can assume a gay identity, you have to let go the hope of ever being straight. That's very important. They gave up on themselves. They gave up on themselves. So these are the people who are going to judge whether or not other people can change. You understand? If I can't change, who's going to change, right? Important. The APA doesn't see this at all. Of course not. All right. So now we're moving into adolescence. We're talking about 12 years old and above. And we call it the erotic transitional phase. Until now, we haven't talked about sexuality at all. All we've talked about is gender identity. And it's around 11 to 12 years old when the client first identifies as same-sex attraction. I remember a physician, he was a surgeon, came to therapy with me, and he said, I remember the first homosexual moment I ever had. He was 12 years old. I said, tell me about it. He said, I remember we were taking a shortcut to school, and I was cutting through the gym, we were cutting through the locker room, and just then a teenager came out of the shower, he was wet and he was naked, and I said, wow. And that was my first homosexual moment. I said, tell me a little bit more in detail what that moment was. And he thought, I think he thought about it seriously for the first time in his life, because for him, that's it. He said, the thought was, wow, I wish I was him. That says everything. I wish I was him. It's erotic envy. It's eroticized envy. And that's what makes it fundamentally different from heterosexuality. The man is not envious of the woman's body, or the woman envious of the man's body. It's complementary. There's a complementarity. Her femininity enhances my masculinity. My masculinity enhances her femininity. But with homosexuality, it's not complementary, it's compensatory. In fantasy, compensatory. Because in actuality, they never gain the lost masculinity because he's got the same problem I have. Homosexual behavior as a reparative drive. That's very important. That same-sex behavior is an attempt to repair, that's where we got the word reparative, childhood emotional hurts. And that is really good news for our clients who come in, because they come in, many of our clients are Christian, and we're telling them, look, you know, it's not just simply a question that you're a pervert, degenerate, sinful person. Your homosexual behavior is your attempt to repair something you did not get in childhood, but that you deserved, that you needed. But that your homosexuality is not meeting those needs. It's not fulfilling the fantasy. That's why you're in therapy. Sex doesn't give you what you're looking for. And so it's a message of hope. When you look at it, the whole picture, can you see that? That's kind of hard to see. Yeah? So we have 4 phases real quickly. The gay claim is, oh, I was just born gay. But no, we have it. 4 phases. Relationship with mother. Can you see that? Is that hard to see? You can't see it. You don't care. Right? You're just listening. You're not even listening. All right? We'll quit early. Phase 1, the relationship with the mother. Early infancy. Intense but insecure attachment. The defense is dissociation. Phase 2, the boy moves on to the father, 1.5 to 3 years old. He does not make that masculine bonding. Phase 4, he eroticizes his peers, so now it's a homosexual problem. Phase 4, he assumes a gay identity. What's really very interesting is about 20 years ago, most of our clients were late 20s, early 30s. That was the majority of our clients. Today, about 50% of our clients are teenagers. Why? Because of the promotion of gay, gay, gay. And so they are assuming a gay identity quickly. And that kind of seals, if you will, the gay identity kind of seals the homosexual condition. And the homosexual condition is simply the result of masculine inferiority, which is a result of attachment to the mother and to the father. Associated features of male homosexuality is male gender deficit, as we've been saying, problems with assertion. In other words, they have difficulty being assertive, and they use sexualization as a form of assertion, aggression towards self and others. A lot of homosexual enactment is either the passive recipient in fantasy. Homosexual behavior is either the fantasy of being the passive recipient of man's aggression toward me, because this is what I think I deserve, my shamed self. I deserve to be abused and dominated by a male. Or I am the abuser to the weak male. So there's always a power struggle in all perversions. This is the early psychoanalytic literature. All the perversions, including homosexuality, is characterized by power. It's a search for power. Detachment from other men, anticipation of rejection. Now, North did a study, our organization did a study. And again, the APA is saying, number one, people can't change. Number two, if people try to change, it's going to do more harm. And three, homosexuality is normal and natural. There's no greater pathology associated with it. Okay, we did a study and we saw a great deal of pathology associated with the homosexual condition. What do we mean by pathology? Pathology defined as self-defeating, self-destructive, maladaptive behavior. Like what? Greater depression. Many, many studies show this. APA says no problem. Greater depression, greater anxiety, greater suicide attempts, alcohol abuse, drug abuse, various substance abuses, interpersonal difficulties, group sex, and what we will call in polite company exotic sexual practices. Gays smoke more. Gay men masturbate more than heterosexual men. Now you would think with all the sex they were having that we'd give it a rest, right? I got one laugh. Okay, it's okay, I could take it. Just one laugh, it's all right. But it's true. This is not to blame the gay community, but what we are saying is young people are not being informed. Oh, gay is fine. But we have a responsibility for a 15-year-old or a 17-year-old and say, look, if you go down this path, these are the problems you are likely statistically to encounter. You're likely to encounter more difficulties. Living a homosexual lifestyle is hard. As one father said to me, I want my son to change. Living a straight life is hard enough. And he's absolutely right. The failure of the male couple. Okay, let's look at male couples. We're talking about gay marriages, very big gay marriages. When you look at it very closely, we see the gay data. Let me just give you a quick one. McWhirter and Mattson. McWhirter and Mattson, 1984. But the reason why I mention that is because it's been duplicated over and over and over again by gay researchers, not by homophobes. Gay researchers investigate the relationships of gay men in relationship. And McWhirter and Mattson were two gays. One was a gay psychiatrist and one was a gay psychologist, and they were in a relationship with each other. And they were determined to prove that gays were capable of long-term sexual monogamy, sexual fidelity. And they went out and looked for 165 of the very best gay couples. So I ask you, of 165, how many were able to maintain sexual fidelity for more than 5 years? Some of them were in relationship for 10 years, 15 years, whatever. How many of 165 couples were able to maintain sexual fidelity? Any guess? Zero. Zero. They were surprised. So they had to change their assumption. They thought they were going to find it, so they changed everything around. And they said, as only psychologists can, we're going to change everything around. And said, they are advising gays, if you expect fidelity, your relationship will not last. The only way it's going to last is if you accept ongoing, regular, out of relationship sexual contact. And that's how it is. So there's the presentation that gay couples can get married because it's equal. It's not equal. Lesbians are less faithful to each other than heterosexual women. Homosexuality is the search for maleness. I remember a client saying to me, my body gets in the way of my happiness. My body gets in the way of my happiness. I said, what do you mean? I don't get it. He says, because I want a real man. But a real man doesn't want me. A real man wants a woman. So I have to be with a guy who's got the same problem I do. You're right. So it's two people coming together looking for the same thing. One man, there was a gay TV channel or something for a while there. And one gay character said, I was so attracted to him that I either had to be him or have him. You see the envy. You see how sex is used to incorporate something deficit. Promiscuity, again, many studies show promiscuity, anonymous sexual contacts, part of the culture, short-term relationships, the natural incompatibility. Andrew Sullivan is a self-labeled Catholic gay. No such thing. You can't be Christian, you can't be gay. You could be Christian and homosexual if you're dealing with it, but you can't be gay and Christian. Contradiction, okay? Andrew Sullivan said, at the end of his life, the gay man has two kinds of male relationships, those that he is friends with and those that he has sex with. Again, the familiarity takes away the mystique. So there's always the search for the new guy, always the mystery. When you look at gay literature, gay novels, it's always the search for the new guy. Okay, so basically, the action steps is to again identify at-risk children, adolescents, and even young adults, to be concerned especially with the young male who is lonely, disconnected, not feeling comfortable with his peers, especially the boy who is lacking a close relationship with his father. A lot of Christians are suspicious of psychology, but really psychology supports the natural law, supports biblical teachings. And good psychology can offer our clients the opportunity for them to fulfill what they want in their own life, client self-determination. I remember a teenage boy coming in the very first session. He sat down and said, I just want my God-intended life back. That's all we do, and that's only what we do. Thank you.